growing up, I went to visit my cousins on their ranch. My cousins lived on a ranch, like a cattle ranch. And they had cattle, they had horses, they had chickens, they had pigs. And when we visited as kids, we had to do the chores with everyone else because everyone on the ranch does chores in the summer. So we'd do the chores in the morning. They had a really huge garden. I usually was weeding the garden, and it was hot. And the best part of the day was midday after lunch when we could go to the river and jump in the river when it was like so refreshing and we were so hot from doing our chores. And that was the best part of visiting the ranch. And we would jump off a bridge that actually was over the river. Listen, kids, don't do this. It's dangerous. Don't do this. But we did it. And we all survived, but it was dangerous. But it felt so fun and scary and exciting. And it was the best part of the river. But rivers they can be fun and you can have a great time at a river, but they can also be super dangerous, especially if they're running at flood stage. Rivers can be fun and they can also be life-threatening. We're in the third week of our series called River Wild, and in this series, we're taking a look at some of the rivers that are talked about throughout the Bible. And what's interesting about God is he tends to tell his story in multiple ways, and one of the ways he tells his story is to use tangible things that you can see and touch and experience and feel. And the rivers, and water is one of those tangible things that God uses to tell his story throughout the Bible. So in this series, we're specifically focusing on stories that have to do with rivers that tell the story of God. And that's what we're going to do today. And today, our story uses a river to help God's people cross over from rebellion to trust, from scarcity to abundance, and from slavery to freedom. And those are the themes of the story today. But first, and we're going to do our stories out of Joshua, which is in the Old Testament of the Bible, and we're going to begin in Joshua chapter 3. But before we do that, I have to set the story in its historical context, which I have to do every time I teach a story of God and Jesus. I always want to put it in the historical context. So here we are in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it's Joshua. But let's start from the beginning. God creates humans. God creates humans in his image, and he wants those human people to have a relationship with him. So he created them for a relationship with him. But humans break relationship with God by doing life their own way instead of God's way, and it breaks the relationship. But God loves humans. He created them to be in relationship with him, so he pursues them. And he pursues them in a number of ways. Eventually, God establishes and attempts to reestablish his relationship with humankind by making a covenant commitment to them through the person of Abraham. And through Abraham, God would build a nation called the Israelites, and this nation would be his people, and he would be their one and only God. And he would make a covenant commitment, a promise to that nation, the nation of Israel. And maybe you remember this, or I've talked about it before, but the relationship between the Israelites and God was tumultuous. And the people were a little bit, I don't know how to say it. The people were in this relationship where they would break up and get back together, break up and get back together. You know, maybe you have friends, or you've been a part of that, where you're in a relationship and you break up, get back together. That was the Israelites. They did that over and over and over again. God was faithful. God was faithful. But the Israelites kept trying to figure it out in their relationship with God. But God continued to pursue them. And during one of the times where they were breaking relationship with God, the Israelites found them in captivity in Egypt for 400 years. I mean, the gravity of that. 400 years they were in captivity in Egypt. But God, always the faithful pursuer of his people, he hears their cries and he makes a promise to lead them out of their captivity and to give them a land of their own. And not just any land, but a good and gracious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land that was more amazing than they could imagine. And it would be their very own land, which must have felt so significant to them after generation, 400 years in slavery. Now they were going to have their very own land. Can you imagine how much they anticipated that land, the promised land? And so the land becomes known as the promised land. The Hebrew is Haaretz Amuvtakat. I practiced that a lot this week. That's Hebrew for promised land. Haaretz Amuvtakat. And that's what they would say. That's our promised land. They were holding on to that. And the Israelites leave their oppression and slavery to embark on a journey towards the new land. And the journey takes 40 years. And a lot happens in that 40 years. God shows himself as a provider because there's a scarcity in the desert of food. There's a scarcity of water. And so God sends manna from heaven that's new on the ground every morning. They had food to eat like Fritos scattered, and you could gather it and eat it every day. I love Fritos. But I don't know about 40 years of Fritos. But God provided everyday food. And then water he provided. A lot of times the water came out of a rock. And God would provide water. So they saw God as a provider while they were wandering in the desert. But they were sad. And they were mad. And they were angry a lot of that time. Because after all, God had promised them Aharetz Tamuvtakat. He had promised them the land, the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. But finally, after 40 years of waiting and wandering, they're on the eve of entering into the promised land. And this is where our story begins today. They're on the eve of entering the promised land. Their original leader Moses has died, and their new leader Joshua is taking them into their much anticipated land. And on the eve of entering the land, Joshua calls the Israelite people and he says, listen. He says, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow God is going to do amazing things among you. Consecrate means to set yourself apart. Set yourself apart to be dedicated for a divine purpose. So Joshua says to the people, listen, we've been through it. 400 years of slavery, 40 years of wandering, 440 years. We've been through it. So now, let's not take this moment lightly. Consecrate yourselves. Set yourself aside for God's new purposes in your life. Set yourself aside to be holy, to be in relationship with a holy God. So Joshua tells them all this, but there's one last thing. There's one last thing that's kind of a barrier for them to enter into their promised land. One final trial, one final opportunity to trust God before they enter. And it is one thing separating the Israelites from finally entering the land. And it was a wild river. A wild river. The Jordan River rushing at flood stage. And they have to get over it to get into the land. And then Joshua says to the Israelites, okay, come here and listen. Listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you. The ark of the covenant of the Lord of all heaven and earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. So the ark of the covenant is like this wooden chest covered in gold. And they would carry around the contents of the ark, which were the tablets of the Ten Commandments that Moses received. Those were inside of the ark. And they carried that ark around for 40 years while they were wandering in the desert. And it represented God's presence with the people. And so they carried around that ark, representing God's presence, and they called it the Ark of the Covenant, representing the covenant commitment, the promise of God to his Israelite people that he would be faithfully their God. And so it says the Ark of the Covenant is going to go before you. So God's presence is going to go in the water. Joshua continues with the instructions from God. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So Joshua is saying, this is how you know the living God is among you. Is the priests are going to carry the ark in before you, and they're going to step in the water. And when they step in the water, it's going to part. The water's not going to part before they step in. They're not going to stand on the edge and see the miracle happen and then safely step into dry ground. They're going to set their foot in the water, and then it will part. A final opportunity to trust God's promises. The whole reason it has taken the Israelites 40 years to get to the promised land is because they struggled to trust God. Okay, little history lesson. Here we are at the eve of entering the promised land. Let's back up. We're going to back right up to the Israelites leaving Egypt. Through a series of miracles, God gets them out of Egypt, and they part through the Red Sea, similar. They part through the water. They get to the desert. And 7 weeks after they get to the desert, they send some spies ahead to check out the promised land. So they send 12 spies, go to the promised land, the land of Canaan, it's also called. Go there, check it out. Come tell us what you see. So the spies go to Canaan, they check it out, and they're like, oh my goodness. Wow. They're like, it's amazing over there. It is amazing. It is everything that everybody said. Everything that everybody said. You know, they brought back pomegranates, and they brought back grapes, and they brought back figs. I mean, all this wonderful fruit, which must have looked amazing, you know, after Fritos, right? So it must have looked amazing. And this is what we read. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is the fruit. But the people who live there, they're powerful, and their cities are fortified, and they're very large. And of the 12 spies that went into the land, 10 of them said, we should not go there. It is going to be terrible for us. It is going to be scary. We are going to die. The people are going to kill us. And in that moment, they decided not to trust the promises of God. Those 10 spies chose to believe that it would be dangerous for them and not for their good to follow God's plan. And they were cowered in fear. And as a result, God said to the whole generation that they would not enter the promised land. And a journey that should have taken 11 days took 40 years of wandering in the desert, representing a whole generation that would die before the people would be allowed to enter the promised land. So if they had learned anything in that moment, they learned that God's not playing. He's not playing. He wants you to trust him. Israelites, he wants you to trust him, and he's going to make the point that you must trust me, and my ways for you, they're good. So that's what they learned from God in that time, and in those 40 years, God meant what he said, and their lack of faith and trust in his promises had generational consequences. So in the 40 years, the Israelites learned to trust God so that they could participate in his miracles. Whew, that's a lot. That's a lot. Like, I got to stop for a second and go, wow, this is a moment for the Israelites. It's a big moment. It's a big theme in the Old Testament of the Bible. This story of the Israelites and God and their relationship, it's a big theme. So let's just review. 40 years of captivity. They get released from Egypt by a series of divine miracles that also culminates in the parting of the Red Sea, very similar to the parting of Jordan. They receive from God the promised land, the Aharetz Muvdakat, and they wander in the desert for 40 years, and they're about ready to get in, to begin feasting on all those wonderful fruits and the land of the milk and honey, and they have to put their foot in the water, and when they trust God by putting their foot in the waters are going to part. Peter, many years later, writes this. He has given us very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in his divine nature. In this moment, the Israelites are able to participate in the divine nature of God because they're learning to trust him. So there they are on the eve of crossing over from rebellion to trust, from scarcity to abundance, from slavery to freedom. And the story continues. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan, and they were standing on dry ground, while all the Israelite people passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing of the Jordan. After 40 years of wandering, they see this amazing fulfillment of God's power. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you're going to stay tonight." And then Joshua told the people, "In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." God asks the Israelites to commemorate, to take a moment and commemorate something that he had done, to use a tangible symbol that they could touch and see, and to place it in a place where their children would see it and they could tell the story of what God had done. God asked them to commemorate, to leave behind the sin and rebellion and walk towards a future with God, to leave behind rebellion, scarcity, and slavery, to leave those seasons and to cross over from rebellion to trust, from scarcity to abundance, from slavery to freedom. I love this story. I don't think it's an accident that was part of the Israel history and that we would read it today, because we know this story, don't we? We experience this story in our own lives. I know I have, and I do. From going my own way to choosing to trust God's way, it's a journey I take all the time. From wandering in the wilderness and just feeling confused and lost and I don't know what's going on, to focusing on who God is and what he's called me to. From living as a slave to the sin that I keep repeating that keeps me enslaved, to living in freedom. Like, that's a choice that we make all the time. We all have our 40 years of wandering in the desert moments. And sometimes they last 40 minutes, and sometimes they last 40 hours, or 40 days, or 40 months, or 40 years. Some of you are sitting here today feeling the weight of something that has lasted for 40 years, and you have regrets, and you feel the weight of that. But when we cross over, when we go to the other side, when we leave the rebellion and the scarcity and the slavery, and we go over here to God's promises, it is good. It might look scary. It might feel like unknown, and there's giants there, and there's things I don't understand, and I don't want to go because I'm not confident that it's going to be good for me. But at the end of the day, this is good. God is saying, I promise you, this is the land that I've created for you, and it is good. It is good. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, God told Moses in Exodus, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then he says, celebrate and commemorate what God has consecrated, what he has set apart for his good and his glory. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. And the Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful. The hand of the Lord is powerful. And so that you might always fear the Lord. So today, I think the question for us, I know the question for me, is what do I need to commemorate? Like, what do I need to pick up the stone and go, God did this. He did this for me. And I'm going to hold this in my hand, and I'm not going to forget that God did this for me, that he took me from here to here. And he so lovingly pursued me and drew me out. What do you need to commemorate? And maybe it's a season of choosing being right over choosing relationships with those you love. Maybe it's a season where you prioritized yourself and your own ideas over what you knew was God's truth. You resisted that. Or maybe it's a season where you're stuck in bitterness and hate and you're wandering in that. We've all had those seasons. And maybe you've been in that season and you remember crossing over. Or maybe you're in that season right now and you're like, oh, but it's scary over there. I don't know what that's going to look like. What if I lose my friends? But I don't know what it means. And we feel all of that. So I brought some stones today. I brought some stones, and I brought them because I thought maybe you are like me and that you need something in your hand to remember what God has done, what he's still doing, what he wants to do, and what he'll do again for me next week when I do it again. He'll do it again for me. He'll call me over. Say, trust me. Trust me, over here, it's good. It's good. So these stones, they represent that the God who parted the Jordan River is the same powerful God who makes a way for you. These stones, they commemorate all that God has done and built in your life thus far. These stones, they represent that God will keep his promises, that he will stake his claim on your life. These stones, they represent that the spiritual landscape of your heart is changing. And these stones represent that God parts the water, that God makes a way when there seems to be no way. And these stones, they represent God's forgiveness. When what should have taken 11 days takes us 40 years. He's like, I'm there. I forgive. I walk with you. Some of you are dealing with something right now where you're stubborn and you're feeling rebellious and you're going your way and you need to lay it down. You need to come back to God. You need to cross over the river. And some of you are remembering that time where you did that and you're celebrating and you're holding the stone for the next generation to see. Either way, this morning, I'm going to give you a chance in a moment to come forward and get a stone. And take it home and place it somewhere as a reminder of what God has done. That you'll set that there and you'll say, oh yeah, I choose the promised land of God. So during this time of communion, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this all together. So we have communion up here up front on either side of the stage on these black tables. And you can come up and you can pick out a double stack cup of communion. It's got a little wafer in the bottom and juice on the top. And we celebrate communion every single Sunday here at Restore because we know that we need reminders, right? What a powerful, tangible reminder that Jesus asked us to do every time that we gather to remember him. And that wafer, it represents his body broken on our behalf. And the juice, it represents his blood that was spilled on the cross so that we could cross over into a relationship with God because of the person of Jesus who built that bridge for us. And so when you come forward in a minute, you'll be able to take that. And then you can come and get a stone and take it home and put it somewhere where you'll be reminded of what God has done. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to split you down the middle. You're going to go this way. You're going to use these center aisles. If you're on the edges, you're going to use these center aisles. Our ushers are going to come and they're going to dismiss you row by row. Then you can walk down. You can get your communion. You can get your stone. Then you're going to walk and use the aisles on the outside of the auditorium to circle back around to your chair, to your seat. And we're going to do that together. I'm going to ask the ushers to go ahead and start dismissing you right now. I'm going to continue to talk. It's okay. You can come. I'll be talking while you're coming. And I'm going to continue while you guys go through this process together. And they're going to dismiss you row by row. Is that what we got going on here? We're going to dismiss row by row? Okay, we're good. All right. So as you're coming, I wanted to take you back to another thing that Peter said that was pretty incredible. He said, and now you have become living stones for God's use in building his house. What's more, you are his holy priests. So come to him, you who are acceptable to him because of Jesus Christ. So these stones, they don't only represent what God is doing, they also represent us, living stones, through which God will build his house, the living stones of God. And so these stones, they represent you and me. These stones, they represent they commemorate the lives that God is working in and through us. They are where the stones which God will build his mission and his ministry. And it's not lost on me at all when I think about this whole idea of water. When God asks those priests to put their foot in the water, their toe in the water, so that he could help them consecrate themselves, set themselves apart. Because Jesus then circles back and asks us to do that in the waters of baptism, to consecrate ourselves through the act of baptism by stepping from going our own way, not just putting our foot in the water to go God's way, but putting our whole body in the water to set ourselves apart to do life God's way. And that's what baptism is. God uses that symbol of water multiple times. And if you've not done that yet, when you pick up your stone today, you're just going to walk right out after service and go to the baptism conversation, put your stone on that table and said, I'm going to consecrate myself. I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to do that today. And in a few weeks, we'll celebrate your baptism with you. And then, when the next generation comes along and asks, what is that trust? What is that abundance? What is that freedom in your life? What are those stones? Where did you get that trust? Where did you find that abundance? Where did you find that freedom? You can tell them the story of a God who replaces 40 years of wandering with a land of milk and honey. I'm going to pray for you. You're going to continue to come while I'm praying. God, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing in our lives. Thank you for chasing us, for pursuing us, for giving us the opportunity to live in a land of abundance with you, where you love us and care for us. And give us your best. Give us courage to walk that journey, to consecrate ourselves, to set ourselves apart.